IVM.
I want to thank Intel for supporting our show. We're all loving working from home, but let's be honest, there are complications. For example, getting help from IT folks if your PC is down can be challenging because you can't just walk up to them anymore. Well, you'll be happy to hear that I have a solution for you, the Intel vPro platform. The platform comes packed with Intel Active Management technology that lets your IT teams remotely manage your systems and fix the problems without having to go to them. So it means more time getting your work done and less time spent on getting support. Visit intel.in/morewithvpro, that's VPRO, to discover how you can do more of what you want and less of what you don't. If you're listening on the IVM Podcast Android app, click the link that's visible to you now.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat. Hello and welcome to All Things Policy. I'm Manoj Kewalramani, and today I am joined by Lt General Prakash Menon, and we're going to be talking about the India-China dispute. But we're not going to be talking about it from the point of view of what's immediately happening in eastern Ladakh, but rather from the point of view of the idea of a mountain strike corps. Now, the Mountain Strike Corps its raising has been put on hold in India in 2018. This is an idea that dates back to around a decade ago, and this is supposed to be a 90,000 strong personnel force which is dedicated to the boundary with China. And General Menon has written about it and talked about the feasibility of such a force. So we're going to try and explore this in depth. So General Menon, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I'd like to begin firstly by asking you about what exactly is the Mountain Strike Corps and how did this idea sort of germinate over the years?
So the Mountain Strike Corps is supposed to be the operational formation which India is raising to deter the Chinese from any major military action on the northern front. So this was supposed to bring about the effect of frightening the Chinese not to carry out an offensive against it. That's basically what it meant. And the history of this corps actually is in the period 2011, when this was first proposed by the Army headquarters to the Cabinet Committee on Security. And the corps consisted of fundamentally two divisions, infantry divisions, mountain divisions. They were infantry, of course. And they were two armored brigades, and all the firepower, the wherewithal for surveillance, and the rest of it, which accompanies such a big formation. As you know, we already have 3 strike corps against Pakistan, which are based on mechanized formation, which is tanks and mechanized infantry. They are meant actually for deep thrusts into Pakistan and to bring about capture territory and as well as also cause destruction to the Pakistani armed forces. So this model was actually the idea was the same. They took it to the northern border. And the idea was that if you could create an asset like this and give it the type of wherewithal that they required, and the wherewithal means it actually included about 90,000 persons accretions, which means increase in the strength of the army. It would cost about 65,000 crores minus the infrastructure for which the note did not actually include. So you can actually add another 20-30 crores into that. So it's about over 1 lakh crores, you can say. So this was proposed first in 2011. The Cabinet Committee on Security, before its consideration, they had sent it to what you call the Chairman Chief of Staff, because they said that this should be considered holistically between the other 2 services, because it would impact the other 2 services. And as usual, the other 2 services were not consulted by this corps. The proposal of this corps was made, but that is not unusual, considering the fact that we even raised Southwestern Army Command, which is located in Jaipur, without the Air Force coming to know about it. The Air Force chief came to know about that when he was having his morning cup of tea and saw the newspaper report that the army had raised to Southwestern Command. So this shows the dysfunctionality of integrated planning itself. And so this was put back to the Chairman Chief Staff's committee. And that's where the other things carried on. So the core essentially is based on the idea that you deter the Chinese, also have a counteroffensive if they do, and you can capture some territory, also cause destruction to the Chinese armed forces, and therefore they will be deterred. That was the central idea behind the Mountain Strike Corps. There is no doubting the fact that there was need for strengthening the defensive capacity or the military capacity on the northern border. That is not in doubt. The question was whether this was the best way to do it. That was the issue. And therefore, the Mountain Strike Corps, that's why, was put back to the Chairman Chief Staff in 2011 itself. And therefore, when it went there, it took a long time. There was a committee which was formed, which was consisted of the vice chiefs, and the Air Force and the Navy were not in favor of this proposal because they would have been affected by it, one. Two, they also disagree with the idea of deterring China in that manner. And so it dragged on in that committee for nearly a year till the then Chairman, Chief of Army Staff, General Bikram Singh, really put his weight behind the proposal and got it through. And how he managed to do that actually is probably something which should remain behind closed doors, as they say. But he got it through. And then finally, the opportune time came when in 2013, Depsang happened. And when that happened, the Mountain Strike Corps took life, and the Cabinet Committee on Security, before anybody knew what was happening, approved the proposal of the Mountain Strike Corps. So Depsang actually was the one which propelled the political leadership to create this. And they themselves were having doubts as whether it should be done, okay, is there a better way of doing it? So that's the initial story of the Mountain Strike Corps itself.
General Menon, I wanted to ask you about, so when this proposal gets okayed and we sort of start to move in this direction, what was the reaction from the Chinese? Because I don't recall, did they see it as something which was aggressive that the Indians were doing, or did they see it as unviable in the long term? Do you have any sense of what the reaction was from the Chinese?
They did not react. They could have possibly seen through it that if you have a Mountain Strike Corps for a 3,000, nearly 4,000 kilometers of the frontage, that would be completely insufficient to do it. Because if you want to do this really in the manner that you want to frighten them, then you would require 3 strike corps. So they didn't react very much, and I don't think they sort of protested at all. In fact, we were playing into their hands, and let me explain why I say that. What is the Chinese strategy? The Chinese strategy is finally about sucking our resources to the northern frontier as much as they can, and also using Pakistan to do the same on the land frontier of Pakistan, so that we are unable to provide the resources to become a maritime power. This is Chinese strategy. So we were actually playing into their strategy by raising this Mountain Strike Corps. After all, we had to maintain it. We require resources. And I must tell you that although it was sanctioned by the Cabinet Committee on Security, it did not have any additional commitment as far as financial resources was concerned. There was nothing like that. It was just approved. So financial resources has another story, because the Finance Ministry has refused, despite even the defense committees actually telling them that you should give a commitment in the long term. And they have said it's not possible according to our rules and procedure. And they have stuck to that. And therefore, they make no commitment except to the one about allotting it for the budget. So how does the military plan for anything when you are not resourced at all? So this is the problem which even remains today, that there's no commitment and you only come to know what you're going to get for the year through the budget. And that's been fought by the MOD itself, the defense committees, but the Finance Ministry has refused to move. It's a matter which they can easily change. It requires change of rules, but that's what you do when you have to do something. But they've never done it. So we had a problem right from the beginning itself. It was financially starved from the time it was sanctioned, because there was no extra resources provided, which means they had to take it from wherever they can get. And that's what the army did, because they can't wait for the government to give money. So they were desperate, they moved it, and they have created a strike corps headquarters. Yeah, it's been there for quite some time now, because to 2014 was the first time when the corps itself was raised. It's a corps commander. It's located in Ranchi. And it has got, I think, already got the infantry division and some of the armor capability and so on. But I think what it lacks is the support systems in terms of artillery, the signals, the engineer complement, and all. So I don't know at which stage it was stopped. But finally, the Mountain Strike Corps had to be, the raising has been held up in 2018 because it reached the point of no return financially at that time. So there was a decision to be taken, what do we do about this? So they had to stop it. So the fundamental problem was that you sanctioned a Mountain Strike Corps, you raised part of it, you didn't provide the money. And that has affected not only the army in terms of the budget, but it also affected availability for the other two services because it is the same cake. So the problem of the financial part remains. And the opposition to this was about one of the things which I just explained to you. We were playing into the Chinese hands. This is exactly what the Chinese wants us to do. Spend more there. The challenge actually to solve this was to be met not by raising a Mountain Strike Corps, but by raising offensive formations with resources from the West, with the Pakistan border. Because we say that China is the biggest adversary, yet the military weight of India in the land border lies against Pakistan. All we had to do was to rebalance from the West to the North. That would have saved resources, saved money. But no, we wanted to raise something new. And that's what we did. So now I presume that now that we have raised it to whatever extent, they can still rebalance. And we have to understand that this Mountain Strike Corps cannot be applied as an integrated unit in any one place because we don't have the infrastructure to support it. One. Two, this Mountain Strike Corps, by the time you have to move it to apply it, and if there is a war on, the Chinese will be able to actually intervene with our road communications and block it to wherever we are taking it. Because you have to now locate this in such a place because you don't know where you're going to deploy it before the war starts. And that's the problem. So operationally, there were several things which went against this idea because it seemed to be impractical. One was the fact that you could not induct it and apply it as a corps. The other one was that if you managed to succeed and apply it and you went across the Himalayas, then you will have to support it logistically. And we didn't have the capacity in terms of infrastructure to support it logistically. Three, if you went across the Himalayas, your spearheads or whatever the formations are, Chinese have better internal lines of communications. They can shift their weight internally from the east to the west. And that means they could easily get hold of your spearheads and put you into trouble. So the question was that then how do you deter China? And that was what I've actually written about very recently, that the idea must be always to give offensive potential to the holding corps. Because right from Ladakh to the northeast, we have these holding formations under the corps commander. Like the 14th Corps commander is now the one who is looking after Ladakh. Now, like that, there are other corps going from east to west. Now, let's just take 14th Corps itself. Now, the asset which you want to use as offensive has to be pre-positioned in Ladakh because they have to be acclimatized in high altitude. They need constant training, both during winter and summer. And what I was saying was they should be actually brigade-sized formations, pre-located within the corps and kept under the corps commander who could use it speedily when he wanted. So the point was that these brigade sizes could be easily moved. We have the air transportation capacity to move them. Instead of creating this monster called a strike corps, which is an elephant. You can't move it so easily. You need instead integrated brigade groups. That would have been a better structure. And what I've written is, and I've written this before, I've actually written in my book, is that these brigades can be pre-located and they can be moved much faster than a strike corps itself. Therefore, one of the things which it will do in terms of deterrence is that since the asset is already in the corps, we will be able to speedily react. Because I don't understand why in this case, in Ladakh, why didn't we react? Why didn't we actually, because they came and sat in territory which is unheld. We've obviously got plans to make sure that we can do the same. And we have the capacity to do it. But we didn't. I'm not sure why. Either the military asked for permission from the political leaders and were not given, or the military didn't ask for permission, which I don't think so would be the case, because this has been the bread and butter of the armed forces for I don't know how long. But I'm not sure what exactly happened, so I don't really want to come to a conclusion. There's not enough this thing for me to do that. But I'm wondering as to why we would not do it.
So I wanted to sort of go back to this question of firstly. So there are lots of people who would say that if we had actually invested over a period of time in developing this particular strike corps, maybe one to begin with, but also more than, given that you're saying that we would need much more across the entire length of the disputed boundary, which is over 3,500 kilometers long, that if we had actually invested in some of this, and like you're saying, the investment should have ideally come with some sort of readjustment with what we have deployed on our western borders. Firstly, tell me a little bit about how challenging it is to actually make that argument within the system, given that anytime when we have this conversation about China being the primary threat, the argument is that, well, Pakistan is the more immediate threat. And therefore, we need to deploy resources over there. So firstly, how difficult it is to actually get to that point where you can have a sensible conversation about this, looking at the long-term strategic view. And secondly, this argument that if we had actually done some of this, we could have deterred what happened in Eastern Ladakh right now. That even if today that argument holds, that if we do build this mountain strike corps, then we can actually deter something like this in the future. Does that really make sense?
Well, to your first point about the Pakistan, that it is an immediate threat. But what is the nature of that threat? The nature of that threat is of terrorism. That is fundamentally the nature. Pakistan is not interested in actually fighting a conventional war with us. We are interested in fighting a conventional war with them under the concept of limited war under the nuclear shadow. They are not interested. So the first capability which we should have against Pakistan is the ability to strike without posturing, which means the moment a terrorist attack takes place, we have to hit them in several places and be ready for any reaction. Which is what we have been doing. Because you can't deal with terrorism in any other manner unless you think that you can attack Pakistan, launch your forces, capture territory in Pakistan, do a lot of damage to the armed forces, and then ask Pakistan not to use terrorism as a tool of foreign policy. I mean, this is absurd. That will never happen. You can't deal with terrorism like that. Even if you capture territory and exchange it with Pakistanis they are giving up terrorism as a foreign policy tool, I assure you the moment you give their land back and come to an agreement, they'll be back to the same game. So we need to see as to how do we deal with terrorism and what is the military role in that. And the idea that Pakistan is an immediate threat is true in a terrorist sense. And surely our conventional weight in any sense, even if we take away resources from there, is much more than what we can bring against Pakistan. So Pakistanis are worried that the Indians will come, but they have the nuclear weapons, so have we. And then therefore, it is under the shadow of these nuclear weapons that this game is being played. But the game is that even if they carry out this thing, we are not going to attack Pakistan. So the point is that we have these 3 strike corps, which are large elephants there, which we cannot utilize. And that's the point. And here again, we need to therefore restructure. It's not that I'm saying that you don't need capability to make thrusts into Pakistan. The shallow thrusts would be made, and they would be dependent upon restructured capability of the strike corps itself, but in smaller. So you'll be able to do 10 shallow thrusts or something like that. And there is this concept now actually being talked about called the integrated battle group. So army is already moving into that, but they're doing that and yet retaining the strike corps. So this thing it is about the military leadership recognizing the utility of military force in the Pakistan context. Whether they are factored in the fact that things have changed when nuclear weapons have come into place. The thinking still is about the big fight. How can you impose your will? I'm afraid that those ideas, the sell-by date has gone long ago. So unless the military leadership makes that shift, that this is what we are required to do. And also, unless the political leadership provides the guidance and they have a dialogue between the two, and then decide that this is the type of war we should be ready to fight with Pakistan, we will still be going along the same track. But I think there is light right now, because if you see some of the present army chief's statement, he seems to get to the idea about what really the type of wars we should fight. Of course, I'm sure he would face tremendous resistance from within the system itself, but I think there is hope there. So once we do that, then we can actually move these resources to the north, and which means we don't have to raise anything new. Of course, we'll have to give them the stuff in terms of firepower, artillery, missiles, EW capability, and so on. So that's a different matter. But those are things which are nowhere near when you have to increase a manpower of 90,000. It's like adding a navy, strength of the navy to the Indian army. Think about the long-term consequences of that. And you were playing into what exactly China wants. So if you look at those considerations, I think maybe now there would be a shift. Although the traditional voices are very, you hear it all along, even in writings and discussions, that if we had the Mountain Strike Corps, we would have actually avoided it. But let me disabuse you of that notion. The Mountain Strike Corps would have been either sitting in Ranchi or wherever they are, somewhere in the plains. Some of them would have been in some formations, wherever they are. The Chinese would have still done what they had to do, because they never got into a fight. They just went and occupied territory which is unoccupied, like they've done in the South China Sea. So you can have any amount of strike corps, they can still do that, because there's no way that China and India can actually sit and guard 3,000 plus kilometers of the frontier. It's not possible. In fact, on the Chinese side, they have nothing. In fact, that makes them more vulnerable, because we have at least some sort of a defenses. Most of the Chinese side, there are no defenses. They have only what you call military locations, which are well connected with each other. But as far as the fighting capability of digging into the mountains, that is very little. So it is not that we could not do something when they did something. I'm really surprised why we did not. And I don't think that the Mountain Strike Corps could have solved the problem that they have created for us. What we could have done is immediately reacted in other places, do the same thing to them. That's why it's called quid pro quo.
So, General Menon, that's well and good, and I sort of agree with you that, a lot of the traditional voices are now sort of back again talking about this. But I wanted to sort of talk about the aspect of once you've created something like this, and once you sort of sanctioned something like this with 90,000 troops, and you've pledged about 65,000 crore rupees, how do you sort of walk this back? Is it feasible to walk it back? Is it even worth walking it back? Or like you said, should we be looking at maybe keeping something like this and trying to see how we can divert forces from the western border to the northern border?
Well, walking it back is, it's all within the government to decide to walk it back or not. And I would think that they should, in the sense that they should restructure this corps, which has been raised, which means that you populate this corps with resources from the West. The corps remains. And you actually don't have to have a corps headquarters, which means you save a lot of resources there, and break them into the brigade size, which I talked about. That can be done. And all it requires really is some paperwork. And surely it can be done. So I'm not saying that the Mountain Strike Corps, whatever assets are there, can be changed, restructured. It requires a bit of paperwork, and then it can be made into the form in which it can be used, because right now it's not in that usable category. It is in about category trying to frighten, but you can't even think of raising another Mountain Strike Corps, because if you see the state of our budgets and the salaries and the pensions which it going out, we are in a very, very untidy situation in the financial front. And we are now in the lowest percentage of budget ever since the 1962 war. And I'm sure that we will have to thank the Chinese, because there will be a budget increase. But then that's accompanied by COVID-19. So the question of actually having more resources, wanting more, will have to be carefully thought out, because we are in a very strained financial situation. So it can be done, and whatever has been raised, those you don't have to take it from new raisings. You can actually fill that with the people from the Western Front. But in addition to that, obviously they will have to have we'll have to buy a lot of guns and missiles and the rest of it. That has to go with it. That will have to come from separately. So everything is possible. The government can do anything it wants.
All right. Thank you so much, General Menon. This was an interesting, fascinating conversation which sort of talked about something that we don't necessarily focus on because when you read these things in the media, you tend to see, oh, this is great capacity building. But actually, it's really important to look at the details behind the headlines to understand whether this is even practicable and whether this actually achieves your political objectives eventually. Thank you so much, General Menon, for sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you very much, Manoj. It's a pleasure.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.
I hope you enjoyed that show. I'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Paytm Money and Intel. It's been a really, really cool week on the network. We've had Ashwin Sanghi on Cyrus Says. We had Masaba Gupta on Advertising is Dead. You should definitely check out Vivek Lath, who showed up on Storytellers and Story Sellers. A close friend and partner of ours, Karthik Paricha, was on the Pragati podcast talking about the future of podcasting, which I think is really, really interesting. And I would like to ask people to check out All Things Policy and what they've been doing. They've been having some really interesting discussions about India's challenging relationship with China as we go forward, and I think that would be a great thing for you guys to check out. So with that, we hope to see you again next week.
Entertainment is like food for the brain. It's a window to culture and a great way to understand the world around us. The internet has changed what it means to be an entertainer, creating new storytellers with millions of fans. It has spawned a new breed, the story-sellers, those behind the scenes creating the business for this ecosystem. They work with brands, platforms and channels who are keen to capitalize on an audience hungrier than ever for more stories. I'm Vineet Kanabar, and I have a ringside view to how stories are told and sold. On my show, I bring you creators, artists, executives and marketers for a freewheeling conversation around the business of entertainment. Tune in to Storytellers and Story Sellers for personal stories, analysis and criticism every Thursdays as I talk to the brightest minds telling or selling great stories today.